Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Chase at Fantic E-MTB, and today we're going to answer a couple questions for you. First of all, we're going to talk about how much suspension do you really need on a mountain bike, and we're going to walk you through the lineup of e-bikes from Fantic, and we're going to talk about the different models and builds within those models, because if you're not too familiar with mountain bikes, you can get kind of lost and a little bit overwhelmed when you're shopping for one of these bikes, because not only do they have 3 models to choose from, but within a couple of those models, there's different build options. So we're going to go through and answer some of those questions today to help you decide which one of these might be best for you. Now, before we dive in and really start talking about these, I do want to reiterate that knowing what size bike you need is going to be really important, and we already have a sizing guide for the Fantic e-bike, so if you're not sure what size you need, that's the first thing you want to look at, so go give that video a watch. Now, with that being said, like I mentioned earlier, there's 3 models to choose from: the 1.5, 1.7, and the 1.9, and what those numbers actually mean is how much travel or suspension travel the bikes have. You have 150 millimeters with the 1.5, 170, and then you have 190. And when you're looking at the bikes and you're trying to decide how much travel you need to ask yourself, what type of riding are you going to be doing, and really what is your skill level? You know, it sounds cool to have a bike that has 190 millimeters of travel, but if you're, say, a beginner rider or you just don't have the skill set to use a bike with that much travel, it can be a little bit overkill. The bike can be a little bit cumbersome, and it's not going to be as efficient when you're climbing on the bike. So it's important to ask yourselves those questions. With that being said, let's talk about which bike you might want. So we'll start out with the 1.5. So Fantic recommends the 1.5 for long distances and moderately difficult slopes. So if you're the rider that's going to be doing your more mellow trails, you don't plan to get too aggressive, big jumps or big old drops or things like that, the 1.5 is going to be great. And to be totally honest with you, 150 millimeters of travel is plenty of suspension for most riders that are out there. Another thing that you might hear people talk about is that having less travel is going to make the bike a little bit more efficient when you're climbing. And yes, that is the case. However, with e-bikes and with how much torque that these motors put out, it's really not something that you need to be concerned with, because even with 190 millimeters of travel on an e-bike, you can still climb just about anything, no problem with these. So you can kind of take that worry and throw that out the window. But again, if entry level, not getting too aggressive, 1.5 is going to be great. Now moving on to the 1.7, Fantic calls this their all mountain bike. And you might hear this classified as an enduro bike. And the name, just what it sounds like. This thing is built to handle anything you can really throw at it, from casual trail riding, but when those trails get really steep, they get rough, you want to do some bigger jumps or some bigger drops, that's what the 1.7 is built to handle. And I also do want to point out as well that from the 1.7 and the 1.9, if you watch that sizing guide video, you'll notice that these 2 bikes, they actually make the head tube angle just a little bit more slack than the 1.5. And the reason for that is just to help the bike be a little bit more stable on those steeper descents and at higher speeds. They also make the bikes a little bit longer for those same reasons. The bikes aren't going to turn or feel as snappy as maybe the 1.5, but you are going to get more stability on those rougher trails and the faster you go. But again, if you want to do all types of riding and you want to get aggressive, 1.7 will be awesome. And then last but not least, you have the 1.9. Now look, I'm going to be honest with you, 190 millimeters of travel on a mountain bike is a lot. In fact, you're coming really close to what a full downhill bike has for suspension travel. So this really is for the rider who's doing the most aggressive trails, the steepest descents, you're doing bigger drops, bigger jumps. If that's the type of riding that you're doing, then yeah, the 1.9 is great. I like to think of it almost as like a full downhill bike that has a single crown fork that you can climb to get to the top of a trail versus having to shuttle up to the top if you're going to be by yourself. So if you're more of a downhill type rider and you still want the pedal assist, the 1.9 is going to be solid. I also do want to point out a couple differences. When you look at the 1.9 and the 1.7, these 2 bikes being the more aggressive, you can see even with the tire selection, they have a more aggressive tire than the 1.5 that has more of a trail style tire. So last thing I want to say with the 1.9, and I kind of mentioned this earlier, is that I know that much travel sounds cool, but if you're not going to be using all that travel, it can be overkill. And this bike is not going to be as efficient when you're pedaling just because you have that much more suspension. And it's the most expensive bike in the lineup. So you could be spending more money than you actually need to when you can get the same benefits out of maybe the 1.7 or the 1.5. Now that being said, now that we've kind of explained how much travel you can say, all right, well, I want the 1.5 or the 1.7. So now we'll just talk about the different componentry on these bikes, because within certain models like the 1.5 and the 1.7, you have different components in different builds and it can be confusing. So we're going to explain what the differences are between those to help you decide. Okay, so we've got the 1.5 bikes here. So you have the carbon and you have the aluminum version. And between these two, there's actually a little bit more than $1,000 price difference. And a lot of people just look at, oh, it's the carbon fiber, but there's more to just carbon fiber that adds to that price. You got to think about the components that come on the bikes as well. So we're going to discuss what you're getting as you upgrade from the aluminum to the carbon frame. Now, a lot of people, when they first see carbon fiber, they kind of gravitate towards that because it sounds cool. And yes, carbon fiber does have some benefits over aluminum. One, it's lighter, so it's going to lighten up your bike for you. It's going to make your bike a little bit more playful. Also, something cool about carbon fiber that a lot of people might not know is that it actually dampens vibration more than aluminum does. So as you're riding those rougher trails with a carbon fiber frame, it's going to absorb some of that shock a little bit better and just give a little bit smoother ride. And there is kind of this misconception out there that with carbon fiber, it's not as strong or it's brittle and it's not going to be as durable as aluminum. Carbon fiber has come a very long ways over the years, and honestly, when it comes to durability and strength, it's every bit as good, if not even better, than aluminum. So that is not something that you need to be worried about. But what you need to focus on are components, because when you make that upgrade, yes, some of that money is going with the carbon fiber, but it's also going towards the components and the upgrades that you are getting. And we're going to talk about some main categories. We're going to talk about your drivetrain components, your brakes, and also suspension. So on the 1.5 Trail, this bike comes with the Recon Silver RL fork. When you go to the carbon, it's a 35 gold RL fork, and really the difference there is just going to get a little bit more adjustability. On the shock, you have the Deluxe Select shock on the Trail model, you have the Deluxe Select Plus on the carbon, and the difference between those two is that on the Select Plus model, you can actually put it in a climbing mode that will restrict oil flow in the shock to make it more efficient when you're climbing. Now when you talk about the drive components, on the Trail model, you have the SX Eagle derailleur, and then on the carbon, you have the NX Eagle derailleur. And when you're talking about SRAM components, I mentioned this earlier, you can get kind of lost because they actually have about 15 different levels of drivetrain components. But here's really what you need to know. As you work your way up in drivetrain components, you're going to get better build, better quality, better durability, and you're also going to save some weight. So those are the major differences. And you will, as you work your way up, get a little bit better shifting as well. For example, on the 1.5 Trail, you're going to have the SX Eagle derailleur, which is a polycarbonate and aluminum body with a steel cage. When you go to the 1.5 Carbon, now you have the NX Eagle derailleur, which is going to have an aluminum body and a steel cage. So a little bit different construction, which means better durability with the 1.5 Carbon. However, as far as the shifting goes, you're probably not going to notice too much of a shifting difference between those. And the last thing we're going to talk about is brakes, because this is a big category and something that you need to really focus on. On the Trail model, you have the level brakes, which are a 2-piston design. On the Carbon, you have the Guide T brakes, which are a 4-piston. And what that means is that with the 4-piston versus a 2-piston brake, if you are riding some steeper trails and you're on the brakes a lot, that 4-piston brake is going to cool better, and that means you're not going to get brake fade as fast, and your brake's just going to last longer in those situations. So if you do plan to maybe do a little bit more of those aggressive or steeper trails, then that 4-piston brake could be a really good upgrade for you. So those are all the components. Now what we need to talk about lastly is just going to be with the battery and the motor. So what's cool about the Fantic bikes is they all use high quality Bros motors, which have been around for a while, very well known, and there's a lot of different e-bike manufacturers that use them. Now all these bikes have a 250 watt motor that puts out 90 Newton meters of torque, which is quite a bit. The only thing that you would need to know, and the only difference you'd see, is that with the 1.5 Trail, the Bros motor in that bike has an aluminum casing and aluminum motor, so it's going to be a little bit heavier because from the 1.5 Carbon and up, you get the S-Mag motor, which is going to have a magnesium casing with the aluminum engine on the inside, so it just lightens it up a little bit and it's a little bit slimmer, but they all still put out the same amount of power. Now, as far as your batteries go, the 1.5 Trail has a 630 watt-hour battery, and then on the 1.5 Carbon and up, it's a 720 watt-hour battery. So with the 1.5 Trail, again, it's the cheapest option, but you're not going to get as much battery life or be able to go as far as you would with the other models. So that does it for the 1.5. Now let's get the 1.7s up here and talk about those next. So now we have the 1.7s, and I'm going to do the exact same thing that we just did with the 1.5. Now both of these bikes are going to share the same motor, which is the Bros S-Mag. They have the same battery, and they also have the same fork, which is the Yari RC fork, which is going to be an upgrade from the 1.5 Carbon fork that we just talked about. Now on the aluminum version, however, you have the Deluxe Select Plus, so same shock as the 1.5 carbon. On the 1.7 carbon, you now have the Super Deluxe Select Plus. And again, we're talking about minor improvements here when you upgrade these shocks. So a little bit more adjustability that you're getting with that Super Deluxe Select Plus. But as far as components go, when you look at the drivetrain on the aluminum version, you have the NX Eagle derailleur. So again, that's aluminum body with a steel cage like the 1.5 carbon. But on the 1.7 carbon, you now have the GX Eagle, which is going to have an aluminum body with an aluminum cage. So shifting on these two bikes is going to be pretty much the exact same. It's just going to that aluminum body and cage. You're going to save a little bit of weight there. Now another upgrade that you're getting with these two bikes is going to be with the brakes. So with the 1.7 aluminum, you're going to have the Guide T4 piston brakes, same as that 1.5 carbon. But when you go to the carbon fiber model, you're now going to have the Code R4 piston brakes, which is going to be a little bit higher end, so a little bit more stopping power, just a little bit better brake coming from SRAM. So those are really the main differences between those two. Now let's get the 1.9 and show you what comes on that bike. So the last bike we have, this is the 1.9 Factory Enduro, and this bike actually has an aluminum frame, but when you look at all the components and the suspension on this bike, everything is top tier. On the suspension for the fork, you have the Zeb Ultimate fork from RockShox, which is actually, the Zeb is their top tier fork, and then for the shock, you have the Öhlins TTX 22mm. And something pretty interesting is you notice that on this bike only, you actually have a coil shock. And you do see some enduro bikes out there nowadays that have coil shocks, but they're much more common on downhill bikes. And kind of going back to what I was talking about earlier, this almost is a downhill bike, and that's why you're going to see a coil shock on this. Now, as far as your drivetrain components, you got the GX Eagle derailleur, so same as that 1.7 carbon, aluminum body, aluminum housing, so it's nice and lightweight, great durability. But another big upgrade too are the brakes on this bike. So the brakes on here are made by a company called Braking, and they're actually out of Italy, and they're just known for very, very high quality brakes. So excellent brakes on this bike. You even get the Renthal fat bars on here and a few other upgrades. So overall, like I said earlier, if you're just looking for the most travel, for the most aggressive riding, and you just want top of the line suspension and components, then yeah, the 1.9 Factory Enduro is the bike that you're gonna want. Now that being said, that does it. That is the 1.5, the 1.7, and the 1.9 and the differences between those models. So hopefully this is kind of help you know, one, where does your money go when you're upgrading from the aluminum to the carbon fiber models and some of the differences between the components. But this was a pretty high overview, and there's a lot more that we could have talked about, but I want you to go out there and do some research on your own. If you look at the product pages, it breaks down all the components that come on these bikes, so you can do a side-by-side comparison just to see exactly what you're getting depending on what bike that you are looking at. So go do some research. That's going to also help you out. But if you do have questions or comments, we want to get those answers, so make sure leave those in the comment section below. To see all the bikes that we offer, it's simple. You can click on the link or head over to RockyMountainATVMC.com. We ship for free over 75 bucks. Like I said, check out that sizing guide to help you know what size bike or what size frame is going to be best for you once you've decided how much travel you're going to want. And also, we have a lot of really good mountain bike parts, accessories, and apparel, so be sure to shop that and get suited up for your next ride as well. If you like this video and you want to see more like it, a lot of great mountain bike content, get subscribed to the Rocky Mountain YouTube channel, give this video a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button, and stay up to date. I am Chase, and we'll see you on the trails.